Hey y'all, I'm Kelly Moody and you're listening to the Ground Shots podcast, an audio project exploring our relationship to ecology through conversations and storytelling with farmers, herbalists, craftspeople, naturalists, artists, and more. Hey y'all, it's Kelly Moody and welcome to the Ground Shots podcast. I'm currently recording this introduction at Summer Lakes Hot Springs in, I guess it's more like central southern Oregon, right on the edge of the Great Basin Desert, and it rained last night and it's so beautiful here this morning. There's snow on top of the mountains. The sagebrushes are releasing amazing aromas and just ran through the desert to get exercise this morning. As I'm recording this, I'm on my way south to Arizona to meet up with the folks from Signal Fire to do a 4-week program with them called Wide Open Studios, and so this will be released probably right after I'm done with that. I've mentioned Signal Fire quite a few times on the podcast and interviewed Ryan Pierce, who's one of the founders, and a few alumni, so you can search through the past episodes to get a little bit more information about this really unique organization that intersects art and activism and really advocates for wild spaces in the West. So this episode of the Ground Shots podcast features a conversation with Marc Williams, who I interviewed in Asheville, North Carolina recently when I visited home and the community where I used to live in Asheville. Marc has been one of my teachers and inspirations, and I feel like I often think of him when I'm out here looking at plants and really diving deep into this idea of pilgrimaging in life on the land. Before I get into what we actually talk about, I want to just read Marc's bio that he has on his website. It's better than I could ever say it. So, Marc Williams is an ethnobiologist, and he has studied the people, plant, mushroom, and microbe connection intensely while learning to employ botanicals and other life forms for food, medicine, and beauty. His training includes a bachelor's degree in environmental studies concentrating in sustainable ag with a minor in business from Warren Wilson College and a master's degree in Appalachian studies concentrating in sustainable development with a minor in geography and planning from Appalachian State University. He has spent over 2 decades working at a multitude of restaurants and various farms. He has traveled throughout 30 countries in Central, North, South America, and Europe, and all of the 50 United States. Marc has visited over 200 botanical gardens and research institutions during this process while taking tens of thousands of pictures of represented plants. See what I mean about getting inspiration from Marc? He is also the executive director of Plants and Healers International, and Marc has taught hundreds of classes to thousands of people about the marvelous world of humans and their interface with other organisms while working with over 70 organizations in the last few years and online. His greatest hope is that this effort may help improve our current challenging global ecological situation. I've taken classes from Marc on mead making and done plant walks with Marc over the years, and when I went to herb school at the Chestnut School of Herbal Medicine, Marc was a guest teacher there and he taught a couple different classes, and any opportunity that I've had to take a class with him when he offers it, I try when I'm around, and always learning something new. And I feel like he is tirelessly advocating for the land and the plants, and I'm really excited that we got to sit down in Asheville and do this conversation. I didn't really do a lot of interviews when I was in North Carolina because I wanted to be present with just visiting friends and family and the land, but Marc reached out a while ago, and then again while I was in the area I was like, hey, why don't we just do it? I was like, okay, let's do it. So we met up in our mutual friend Caleb's backyard in West Asheville, and they have a flock of chickens back there, so you'll hear in this interview occasional chicken visitors, which is really sweet because West Asheville is like a semi-urban area, and it's really neat to see people doing the homesteading in the city. So in this conversation with Marc, we talk about the green path as a way to live life, and a physical gathering that is nonlinear and open to anyone. We talk about Frank Cook's influence on the ideas behind the green path way of life. And Frank Cook is someone we've mentioned a few times on the podcast, woven in here and there. You can hear more about Frank Cook in the 2 episodes we have featuring Turtleton. And we talk about what is the green path, fermenting processes, reskilling for living closely to the land, donation-based or free plant walks, the sharing that happens at earthskills gatherings, folk schools, botanical gardens, a camp at the Rainbow Gathering, and more. The interpretation of what is green path is really what we talk a lot about in this interview. Different opportunities for education about the natural world and our connection to it. Issues around accessibility at earthskills gatherings and with the green path. The urgency of re-localizing and learning skills of sustainability. Asheville, North Carolina as an incubator for the green path. The role of permaculture in the green path. The importance of pilgrimage and how a pilgrimage can be interpreted in multiple ways. And pilgrimage as a form of meditation and rite of passage. We talk about addressing the reality of how we travel and how it has a large environmental footprint. And even travel with good intentions. And I think about this all the time with my lifestyle. For sure. Learning skills is a form of activism. And in this conversation with Marc, I made notes on a lot of the different sort of organizations and people we talked about in the episode. So on my website, in the links section, and I do this for every episode, and I don't always mention it poignantly in the intro or outro for the podcast, but I try to put a lot of links and make sure they all work and go to the right places and stuff, but I have linked, a lot of stuff about the Green Path and Plants and Healers International, Botany Every Day, which is a online donation-based plant families program that Marc runs, and stuff on the United Plant Savers and more, so please do check that out to see into all of those organizations and educational opportunities. There's also a YouTube video featuring Marc doing a plant walk on the website, and I also do that with some of the other episodes, kind of if there is a YouTube video available that connects to the person, it is there. So I just want to say too that if you were inspired by this project, please do support us on Patreon. It really is the only funding I have for this project, and each episode sometimes can cost a couple $100. So I appreciate any amount of donation that people give for any amount of time. It's all contributing to continuing this work. So with that, let's go ahead and get to this conversation with Marc Williams, and happy listening, y'all.
Burn, burn with the light that reveals our faces. Burn, burn with the heat that will warm these places.
My name is Marc Williams, and I am the Executive Director of Plants and Healers International, and currently we are in West Asheville in western North Carolina, in particular on Westwood Place, so west, and we're actually on a street that I lived on for 3 years, from 2004 to 2007, so before we started recording, I was telling you how all these memories are like flooding in of other people that I've known over the years that lived on this street, and also I've worked actually on this property where we are currently as a landscaper many years ago, probably a decade ago. So in the old home place, or the new home place, I guess, for me.
We were thinking this maple tree is pretty old. Over 100 years old that's next to us?
Yeah, probably. We're next to a great old silver maple. They're some of the bigger trees we have left in the urban landscape around here. Always love to see them. And there's a huge oak that you can imagine has been friends with this maple for over a century right across the road. So that's pretty neat.
Cool. So you run an organization called Plants and Healers International. Will you explain what that is?
Yeah, so Plants and Healers International is a nonprofit that is continuing the work of Frank Cook to basically advance human culture in harmony with the natural world. That's kind of the distilled version of our mission. And we do that in a lot of different ways, and there's a lot of threads of Frank's work to carry forth. And really, in reflecting about our time together today and doing this podcast, one piece of that work that then touches on a number of others that seem like it would be good to dialogue about is the green path. And the green path is both a sort of metaphor for how to live your life, and at the same time it's an actual happening, kind of an organization, if you will, but very loosely in that way. Somewhat pretty much people show up as they feel called, and there's no real bosses. But initially Frank was kind of the boss. He had this vision in 2006 to bring together a gathering of people that kind of already were initiated with understanding a lot of the major wild edibles around them, or major medicinals around them, or maybe like how to make a sauerkraut or a honey wine. But he kind of envisioned kind of taking them to the next level. If you think about like in college where you take like English 101 and then you end up with English 303, like that's kind of what he envisioned as this like kind of sustainability skills 303. Like, not only do you know how to make sauerkraut and honey wine, but you also know how to make your own miso and know how to just do these more complicated types of tasks, and that you know more than just the top 10 wild edibles and top 10 medicinals, but you really start to learn most of the plants around you. And so he envisioned this gathering to bring together advanced people to then further advance themselves. And out of that was born a annual tradition of having a Green Path camp as part of the annual rainbow gatherings, the national rainbow gatherings that happen in a different national forest in a different state each year.
Cool. So Frank was an ethnobotanist. He lived here. I mean, Turtle's talked a little bit about Frank on the podcast in the past, but this is one of the places he spent a bunch of time and had a lot of influence. And then he also traveled around the world and had a lot of influence. So, and the concept of the green path is something that he coined that, I guess, right? Or was it kind of a collective thing that y'all all
Yeah, it's a good question. And just for clarification, if you were to Google Green Path, you would see everything from making a lot of money to making a lot of ganja. So, like, clearly that's a term that is, like, out there in a lot of other contexts.
Coined,
Yeah, but I think as far as this actual event that happened, it's kind of a brainchild of Frank in that term. And there's also been some offshoots. There's this smaller gathering that's called the Green Scene that Frank also envisioned with one of our great local teachers, Ken Krause. And to be honest, I didn't get to go to the first Green Path gathering. I was there at the Rainbow gathering where it got brought to Rainbow. I'm not 100% entirely sure of the backstory, and it would be interesting to kind of see that, because Frank is somebody who's known as an avid journaler, and so there might be some things in his journals about how that really kind of precipitated into his consciousness and was brought to the fore that could be neat to explore at some point.
And I went to one rainbow gathering when it was in Tennessee. I went to the Green Path, and it's still the Green Path camp. It's still a camp, too, to this day, right? At all the rainbow gatherings?
Right, yeah. That's a good question. So Tennessee was a number of years ago, and Green Path does still occur. It was in Georgia last year, and right near the Wisconsin-Michigan border this year. And over the years, we've kind of had this division of labor happen where we kind of basically have like an East Coast group and a West Coast group. And so sometimes, because Rainbow can be anywhere in the country, if it's in the East Coast, it's going to be kind of one set of people and a certain type of energy, I guess, although there's certainly harmony and a lot of overlap between the groups. But then out west, it would be other folks that were holding these plant walks and teaching these fermentation classes and talking about traditional Chinese medicine or Ayurveda are these things. And I know you've been to Rainbow, so you kind of have a sense of it, and it's a real big thing, this idea of the Rainbow Gathering, but it bears probably unpacking just a little bit. I actually did a whole paper on this when I was in college in the late 90s. There's books about it and everything, but sure, the long of it, it's a gathering that's been happening since the 70s, and the national one in particular always happens around July 4th, and people tend to gather a week before and after July 4th at its maximum, which can be anywhere from 10 to 12, maybe even 15,000 people, but often more recently a good bit less, and especially in the East Coast. And so Rainbow, I kind of think about as this full spectrum thing, right? Like that, like a rainbow, there's all the colors, and so kind of it's a microcosm of the macrocosm of society. And although there is a subset that is self-selected to be there, and often you have to walk miles to get into the gathering, which is certainly a filter, it still has all the issues, shall we say, of the larger society. There's a lot of beauty there. There's a lot of challenges too. I tend to focus more on the nature skills aspect and more of the daytime activities versus the evening activities, which is kind of like, you know, whole different vibe. So basically Rainbow can be a lot of things to a lot of people, but for the Green Path, it's really like we're the nature skills education camp of this happening. And everything, I guess, is really important to mention at Rainbow is basically by reciprocity, by donation. There's not really money except money that's pooled with the suppliers of the food, because there are a whole bunch of kitchens interspersed throughout the woods, and they will go in on hundreds of pounds of oats or beans or rice or something. But as far as like to go to a yoga class or a plant walk or anything, that is all stuff that, you know, is done by volunteer of People's Accord who want to do that. And Seven Song is one of the main leaders of the plant walks at the Rainbow Gatherings.
He's been in the Green Path camp for quite a while too.
Yeah, I mean, he really holds down the first aid, which is called Calm at Rainbow. And at the same time, they're kind of like a sister group to our Green Path group, and we often try to camp somewhat near each other because in particular we're all interested in nature, and a lot of people in both of those camps are interested in healing. And so Seven Song is one of Frank Cook's initial teachers and one of my initial teachers, and definitely is, I think, one of the foundation stones of this idea of the Green Path. With thinking about that more now as like this life path of like these certain skill sets that is ideal for any sustainable person to acquire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's not necessarily a concept that can be just, it's a camp that you go to and it's only here in this one place, this certain group of people. It's just a way of being in the world that anyone can embody no matter where you come from, right? And that's what I really found inspiring about it when I first came here to this area, even though I had been doing skill stuff or like learning plants before I came here, just like solidifying that idea, like this is why it's important, you know, like all of these things are connected, like learning how to do things with the land, you know.
Yeah, for sure, all connected, and to just think that there's always deeper you can go. I mean, and getting ready for this interview, another thing we talked about is like this place of initiation that you might find through going on a plant walk at Rainbow, and then understanding that people still really study intensively medicinal plants in order to heal. And then all of a sudden you're at Seven Songs Northeast School of Botanical Medicine, or you know, in the case of us, I really kind of center our initial relationship in connection to Juliet and her Chestnut School of Botanical Medicine.
It started for me like learning about the United Plant Savers.
Right.
And then going and working there for a summer, and then Paul Strauss and some of the other herbalists there were like, you should study with Juliet. And then I came to Asheville.
Yeah.
But I don't know how I don't even know how I found the United Plant Savers, but that was like my first step, I feel like.
I love that that comes up, right? United Plant Savers is really like a sister organization to Plants and Healers International in so many ways. And they're really focused on, in particular, the sustainable connection that we can have to these really special plants like ginseng and black cohosh and golden seal that a lot of people have heard of. And there's this incredible sanctuary in Ohio. They're actually having a big event around the fall equinox to celebrate the opening of a new center named after another really big influence of myself and Frank Cook and Juliet and others, Jim Duke. And yeah, it kind of just speaks to this idea of the green path also not being linear, that as you said, it's not, it's open to anybody, right? And that if you kind of don't even scratch too much beneath the surface, you'll find in any community somebody that's out there doing foraging and making salves and tinctures and
Initiation opportunities
yes,
are everywhere, right?
Exactly. And of course some are going to take you deeper than others. That United Plant Savers one is a real intensive, like weeks long,
super immersive.
Yeah, super immersive program, you know, versus like you know, one day or one weekend type of thing. And of course different people are at different places on their journey and need different levels, and oftentimes people would go for some initial thing that sparks their fancy, and then they're going to go deeper into an exploration of how they can learn more about their interest. And we talked about how there are just so many cool nodes. I guess one thing that would come up that's more overarching, although it'd be nice to talk to some specific awesome places and people, is this initiative we have through Plants and Healers International called PAN. And PAN is an acronym for the Plant Allies Network. And basically up on our website, if you go to the PAN page, you will see a series of various different maps of, for instance, all the botanical gardens of the world, or all of the foragers of North America, or all of the different eco-villages, or seed savers, or various different working on farm opportunities, and also foraging maps for various different places, all sorts of really cool things. And so I would encourage people to go there as kind of like a center for really hundreds of various different incredible opportunities to initiate yourself or go further on the green path.
Do you organize that, or can people add to it, or like participate in it in some way?
Good question. So initially our vision with PAN a number of years ago is this idea of kind of a collection of all of those different things into one, right? And if you're into botanical gardens, you could click the Botanical Gardens button and those would light up like in a kind of Google Maps sort of way. You're interested in seed savers and those would light up, and you could turn on or turn off different layers. Of course, that is very possible in this modern age, and at the same time, this is where there's an interesting roadblock sometimes on the green path, and that a lot of people that are interested in nature skills and wanting to be outside and everything aren't necessarily interested in doing the back-end programming or even skilled enough. Like I certainly am not, and I even got a minor in geography and did lots of GIS in graduate school. It's a place that we might move to eventually to integrate all of these, but currently right now basically there's 30 some links to 30 different map programs around different focuses, and some of those are collaborative where they can be added to either directly or certainly with permission from the administrators, and then some of them are just kind of set as they are. And the Botanical Gardens one in particular has some good input potential, and a number of others too.
I think about, well, at least for me, being a traveler and constantly like navigating the web and like how everyone's connected all across the country and the world, and I discover a place or person or like a entity, I'm like, I want to note that. I mean, I pin it on my Google Maps on my phone, but the idea of being able to share that, I mean, and then some people are really focused in certain bioregions too, and they know what all the, this, school is here, or this new, like, community gardens opened up here, and they have, like, all the plants labeled, like, even things like that. I'm just, it's got my mind rolling how cool it would be to share more, like figure out a way that people can do that. And I think the tech part of it is definitely a limiting factor when it comes to like plant people,
Potentially, although if you're listening out there and you're that holy grail plant person that's really good at computers, do feel free to contact any of us. We need you.
I was just at the cabbage school the past few days, which is something that wasn't here really, I don't think, when I was living here last. Have you heard of the cabbage school?
I'm not familiar with the cabbage
It's
school.
out in Leicester Sandy Mush, and it's like a folk school slash they do tech stuff and plant stuff and building, like sustainable building. They kind of do a whole lot of different things, but they're really putting an activism work, but utilizing tech and making things. So,
Awesome.
I don't know. I'm curious. I was just thinking, like, wonder if someone from the cabbage school would. It's a nonprofit too. Would have the skills to create or work on that part of the project.
Wow, that's wonderful. It just like also is such a reminder of both how lucky we are and how humbling it is in this area to have so many people doing so much awesome stuff. I mean, I moved here in '99 and this is my main home base, and you live mostly out west and you're teaching me about something in my backyard. And yeah, at a certain point though, it's also like so kind of like full. You only have so much bandwidth, you know,
Yeah,
and
totally.
I basically have way more potential collaborations and things to check out than really time available currently, which is an interesting place to be in. And it does also bring to mind how we were talking about Pan, something that's very similar to Pan that really, when we saw that, we were like, well, they're kind of doing a lot of kind of what our vision is New Mundo. And they're really a good one to check out because anybody can get their place up on that map or could advocate for a place being up on that map, and it is international as well. So you've got that kind of at the macro. You've got the cabbage school is one item within this really incredible array of educational opportunities locally. And then I think of things that are kind of somewhere mid-range, like on Pan we also have a map for all the earthskills gatherings. And really a big part of this concept of the green path that we've been talking to, but just to put a fine point on it, is reskilling. And Frank really brought this in strong from graduate school in England that he did at Schumacher College, and really coming out of the work of Rob Hopkins and others doing transition culture. And transition culture is its own frame, but within that is this idea of us really reclaiming our abilities to make things, whether it's to make our own wine, as I mentioned earlier, or your own jam and jelly, or as I know that you do a lot, making your own clothing or bags or art from natural materials. All of these different things are an opportunity to reconnect with source, with our foundation. And the earthskills gatherings are a real big opportunity to do that all over the country. We're lucky to have some of the older ones and bigger ones in the southeast, where you might have easily 150, 200 different classes about all these different things, from friction fire to how you make rope to how you do hide tanning.
Come home to me, lay your head upon my breast, feel my skin beneath the grass. Come back to me where you're sure to find your rest, my twine and limbs around your chest. Come make your bed in the folds between my flesh, drink and bathe and be refreshed. From my dust you were born, to my dust you shall return. The table is laid, now take your place. Where have you been, my son? Where will you be then, my daughters and my wayward sons? Come Suck the marrow from my bones. Chase tomorrow from your minds. Come fill your greed, take as much as you have need. Till there's no soil for your grave. From my dust you were born, to my dust you shall return. The table is laid, now take your place. Where have you been, my son? Where will you be then, my daughters and my wayward sons? From my dust you were born, to my dust you shall return. The table is laid, now take your place. Where have you been, my son? Where will you be then, my daughters and my wayward sons?
There's something I've been thinking about a lot, especially traveling out west and like being around a lot of different kinds of people. What do you think about accessibility in the green path? Like, it feels like, I don't know, Asheville's a bubble, you know? Earthskills community is a bubble. And I'm always trying to think about how those spaces can feel more welcoming and open to people who, like, and I mean, I hear people's feedback. Went to this Earthskills gathering and I felt nervous about being there and I want to learn these things, but I don't feel like, and then eventually maybe they get comfortable after a few times, but I don't know. What do you think about accessibility in the green path?
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting that I thought about that question and almost wrote it on the outline that we went over, but didn't, and so now spontaneously it's here. I mean, I think that that question is up for every kind of group in society right now, right? Whether we're talking about accessibility to people of color, accessibility to differently abled people, accessibility to people that are on some spectrum of gender. You can kind of just name all of these places where we, the land of the free, have unfortunately fallen down at times in making sure things are free and accessible to everybody, right? And I think that a lot of that, especially in these kind of spaces, which tend to be more progressive and open in theory, is kind of like built into the wallpaper, into the foundation of our society. And so a lot of it is just doesn't even come up on the radar because it's just kind of like the air you breathe and the water you swim in. This idea of, like you said, a bubble where there's a lot more uniformity than difference, and then yeah, it can vary, you know, depending on what people's agenda is, on how it can even be a little bit more you know, intentional to kind of like keep a certain comfort zone, you know, and just keep things as they are, you know, as they're familiar. And at the same time, certainly with the green path, with these skills, this is something that is both the heritage and I would say the you know, inheritance of every person on the planet to know how to do these things, and is something that for anybody that needs and wants those skills, that ideally they could have access. Now, at the same time, there's a lot of folks, you know, that would view this, though, for mainstream society as a pretty marginal activity anyway. And so no matter what walk of life you have, you might roll up to something like this. You see these people that are already super skilled. You feel maybe this level of intimidation about how you are not that skilled, and you know, so that's a kind of internal personal process I think that can come up for a lot of people when you feel like you quite don't quote unquote fit in, that you don't have buck tan, you know, breeches, you know, and you're not wearing, you know, your palm frond hat, and you know, you don't have your you know, your spoon carving knife in a holster on your belt, you know. I mean, there is like a certain way that is presented for these folks that are initiated that I think can be like in one way, it could be encouraging. It's like, oh, I want to do that. I want to be that person. But in another way, it could be like, wow, that's really different than my life back in the city, or just anything I conceive of as something that I'm really aiming for. I just kind of came here to learn, what I can eat from the wild, or something. So you kind of got to meet people where they're at, I think, is a big part. And I do feel like a lot of these situations, whether it's the earthskills gatherings, the herb conferences that I go to about medicinal plants, are trying to think about inclusiveness in a really intentional way, and are really trying to dialogue about how to open up opportunities and actively encourage diversity within those spaces.
How to make it relevant too, It's not just like, hey, come. It's like, well, how is it relevant to people other than the people it's already serving too?
You're right. And how is it enticing to other people that maybe aren't already initiated? I think is a big thing, that kind of hump to get over of, this is weird. This is, antiquated. This is, all of these things that kind of feel like not relative, and relevant, like you said, and how to just kind of frame that into something else that we did talk about for an outline of discussion. I mean, it really circles back to me around sustainability. It circles back to me, just to put a fine point on it, for the survival of our species. And I know that might seem overblown and everything, but I've been saying sustainability for the better part of 18, 19 years now, really hardcore. And it's very clear to me that if people don't get these skills and start re-localizing their connection to place and the things that they use in their daily life, then our species, somewhat sooner than later, is probably not going to make it.
Yeah, it feels really vitally important right now to do this work and to spread knowledge no matter what level you're on, and to try to push that edge of how to make it more accessible. Like there's like a creativity in that, and like create opportunities for the green path in many places outside of what you imagine it to be. It doesn't have to be where there's so much greenery and like wildness.
Oh yeah, I would definitely follow up with that and say, actually, now it's a time we have a place like Asheville where it's just so saturated. The joke is you throw a rock and it hits a massage therapist, bounces into a yoga teacher, and then like finally ends up with an herbalist, and you could insert a few other of these kind of like top trades. And clearly, obviously, most people are still doing, more mainstream things for medicine and exercise and all these things, but it does feel like it's become saturated to a certain degree in this tiny town. It's about 100,000 people that live in Asheville proper. Meanwhile, we have way more here than you could find in in Atlanta, Georgia, or like Miami, real big cities, let alone like mid-tier like Charlotte, North Carolina, or Richmond, Virginia, or something. And so it's thing that I feel like is ripe right now, of people like actually going forth and multiplying in the spaces where this stuff is not happening already.
And Asheville feels sort of like an incubator spot, and I mean, traveling, I've definitely noticed there are other places that are like that, of course, in the country. I've mostly just been traveling in the past few years within this country. I'd like to branch out, but that people come here too for a while and then maybe leave and then plant seeds elsewhere. Like, and some people just stay and they hold it down, So but it is like, okay, if you're going to stay and you want to offer your skills, like, you're offering them to people who already maybe know some of those things, or like, I don't know. I mean, everyone has their own thing to offer, and I think that whether you go out and plant the seeds and create the green path in other places, or whether you stay here, it's all beneficial and amazing and like important right now to be doing in this world. And especially, it seems like the past couple years, since our political situation in our country has gone a really particular direction, that it feels to me even more vitally important that no matter where you are or what you're doing or where you're living, like, just go in that direction,
For sure, yeah, you gotta, just do what you can with what you've got, where you are, and if you feel called to move, then move as well, potentially too. In particular, I'm very sensitive to this idea of sort of preaching to the choir in a bubble space that is, somewhat of a comfort, especially depending on, like, I grew up in a very different space where I was like beaten down both physically and mentally and all sorts of other things. And so for me, like, I'm really sensitive to like trying to go out and throw myself against a wall to like force people. Well, I don't think you can force people to do anything, but my point is like to kind of do that more pioneering work where it really is like a heavy lift just to get people to be interested and not think you're weird. It takes a special kind of person that's going to be that pioneer person. And at the same time, I think that there is a need a bit more. There's a saying, each one teach one. And one of my friends and colleagues and teachers, Eric Lewis, he's kind of shifted out a little bit, each one teach 10. And even when Frank passed away, which happened 10 years ago, August 19th, 2009, he was saying, we need a 10 times, like basically an exponential growth in awareness in these issues and attaining of these skills. And, here we are 10 years later, and I would say we're far, far from his vision, and the timing is even more pressing right now to like get the word out to folks that they've really got to adopt some of these practices, not just for fun or as a lark or to, like in the Renaissance Fair way, which is awesome. I love Renaissance fairs. That was one of my big things growing up. But I'm saying not just as like a weekend warrior for 1 week a year. These are things that we really need to incorporate on a daily basis. Like something as simple as Frank would say, eat something wild every day.
I was just thinking, will you go into a few of the things that people can do that you feel like resonate with this path?
Yeah, so one term that hasn't come out so far that's really part and parcel to all of this is permaculture. And I imagine a number of folks listening are familiar with that already. But if you're not, please go Google permaculture, spend a little bit of time and understand how this is one of the key elements that can, I think, really preserve our space on this planet for a much longer time frame than we're currently set out for. And there's permaculture classes that are all over the world. It's a very international thing that you can get certified in and then actually make a career out of consulting and designing landscapes. It's mainly a thing around designing like food systems and energy flows and where the water comes from and stuff. So I think, ideally people would get certifying permaculture in high school. I think like everybody would go through a permaculture course. It's just like basic education. But unfortunately, we're pretty far away from that now. I did get to do a permaculture course when I was an undergrad at Warren Wilson College, so shout out. And there are some other places like that. But yeah, there's just all these different nodes. The folk schools come to mind because of my just real loving of the activities you do with crafts and folk art and things and the people you study with. And so we're lucky around here once again. We have the John C. Campbell Folk School, we got Penland, we've got Arrowmont, and at the same time there are other schools like that in other places. That'd be a good map, huh? Like just that, the folk school map. Maybe we can work on that one as a layer. But then of course all the people that teach at those folk schools then have their own kind of life stories, and I know you work with some of these folks that have been spending decades doing this kind of stuff.
Just making things and being a part of the process. Yeah. I mean, folk schools are great incubator centers too, like just like Asheville is kind of seen as an incubator. People come to teach about broom making or baking bread or spoon carving or making instruments or, a number of things creatively engaging how to make stuff. Penland is its own version of that, and yeah, I'm really personally fascinated about how that can intersect also being connected to like food and medicine, like making things that are crafts that we use in our everyday lives and the food and medicine piece and how that enriches our lives,
All right. Or having birds in your backyard. There you go.
Right? That's something, this is in town and it's perfectly fine to have a flock of chickens in your backyard, you know?
Which is an interesting point. I have a friend who made that her mission for like well over a year for the city of Jacksonville to be able to have chickens in town.
Simple things. You know?
Exactly. And that builds up into this incredible tapestry. You know, each one of us finds this personal passion that we have and that we want to pursue. And they're like these building blocks in this beautiful mosaic of activity. And another thing that comes to mind as far as that goes, which, is another activity, a potential activity that I'm realizing is something special. Well, it almost like, kind of like, yeah, I don't exactly know what I'm saying, but what I'm getting at is this concept of pilgrimage. What I'm getting at is this concept of pilgrimage and how important that is. And I know that you've done some pilgrimages and you've had other people on your show that have done that, and I've done that to some degree myself. And certainly Frank Cook, who walked across North Carolina and walked across California and did lots of other long walks of various sorts. He, has this idea that I feel inside of how important that is at some point in time. And a lot of people will be familiar with the Appalachian Trail, or out west, the Pacific Coast Trail. So those are some ideas. There's historically religious ones, like you've done the Camino de Santiago. But I would like to just kind of talk a little bit about that idea of pilgrimage, how that's affected you on your path, maybe.
Yeah, I think at least doing the Camino, I had no idea what I was getting into when I decided to go do it, but that the idea of using your body and feet to move across the ground at the pace of the human pace, like, you can only take in but so much information at that pace, like versus if you're in a car going down the highway traveling, which is mainly what I do now a lot, although I try to get out and walk whenever I can and do little mini things. But it really dawned on me when I did the Camino, the chickens are coming over here, that we kind of are numb to like I was thinking about the pain of the world because my feet hurt, I was dealing with the physical pain of like the walk, and how having that pain is like having more empathy and having more connection, and I'm at a pace where I'm noticing everything a lot more than I would in the car, and also the fact that I was able to get through it made me realize that I could do a lot more than I thought I could do. So it was both the connection piece and like the connecting to myself and connecting to whatever my surroundings are, because the Camino is kind of it could be you're in the wilderness in the Pyrenees, in the middle of the desert, and it's all just plants, or you could be going through like urban sprawl to try to get from one end of the city to another before then you camp or stay in a hostel or whatever, and you see every part of civilization, every part of the earth. It's not like one thing or the other, and you have to witness it. And I think it's important, at least to me, that if anyone wanted to do a pilgrimage, it's about witnessing whatever that place is. And I think, to me, I'm thinking about why Frank Cook may have done, the one in North Carolina or the walk across California or other walks. It's like you can't help but witness through your body moving across the land, that place, whatever it has to offer, whether it's all industrial or whether it's all, forest or whatever it is. And then by that witnessing, you gain wisdom and you have something else to offer the world too, And I think without those kinds of experiences of like more intimate knowing, I don't know, we can kind of miss things, and when we don't have that times to remind ourselves of that connection, then why are we doing what we're doing, And I know that not everyone really can take time off work or physically can maybe do the walks or something, or it might not be safe for everyone, It's going to be a different experience if I walk across California than when Turtle did, because he's like a white male and I'm like, a young woman, But still, it's, it's still possible for anyone, It's just like, yeah, what do you think?
Well, first and foremost, I really appreciate your sensitivity to the difference of people's experience in the world, because I think that often there can be a broad brush, and I was kind of alluding to the privilege piece in the preamble to the subject, because yeah, who can take off for weeks or even months to just walk and not work and get paid? That is a pretty small subset of our population. And of course, different people can manage that in different ways. Like Frank didn't have a car, he didn't have a house, he barely ever even had a phone, except one that was kind of given to him for a little while, and then he gave it up.
And he only took donations really for his walks most of the time. Right?
Yeah, and so very little overhead, I guess is what I'm saying. Most people aren't in that place. And so just to kind of really understand that, like, a pilgrimage could be a couple weeks, couple months, it could be a couple hours, or it could be a day, a month, over an accumulated period of time. So like you said, differently abled people, it could be over thousands of miles, it could be in your own living room in a certain way if you kind of get creative in how you frame it, and so definitely just encouraging people to think about those different ways that this can manifest. But beyond that, I just thought there were some things that really resonated with Frank and my understanding of his process and my own process, and what you said about your process, and also having talked to Turtle, since he's a mutual friend, and this idea of how time moves. That time just moves at a different pace. And of course, we're so connected now and so used to just on demand, get everything we want when we want, faster, more. And so it kind of breaks down that into this whole different realm of experience. These other benefits, though, of this idea of pilgrimage, like you alluded to, is this sense of accomplishment at the end of doing something that's really hard. And that really ties into this other thing I feel like is the heritage of most, if not all people. It's hard to say absolutes, but basically this idea of a rite of passage. It's basically kind of getting into this wheelhouse of where a lot of indigenous groups have something that kind of pushes you to your edge, and you really start to then get this download of a vision for who you are in the world. And part of that often is pain, as you said. And when we are in a pain place, it is by definition humbling to be in pain. And oftentimes that humbleness then will lead to empathy and connection to the world's pain. It's this universalizing sort of force for a lot of people. And all of those just really totally resonate. And then this idea, if you did want to learn the landscape, what better way than on foot? Even by bike, you're going too fast often to really learn what plants are around you, or what fungi are around you, or what birds are around you. And maybe some people are familiar with this term of food miles, but Frank got into these terms like food feet or medicine feet, right? So average food can travel thousands of miles, and we're talking about, well, how can you get food from right along your commute, or in your front yard? And this is a skill that can really be honed through many miles of observing the landscape at that kind of pace.
I mean, I know too, a pilgrimage could be even this backyard. Right now I'm thinking, like, if I lived here, and maybe I would have a difficult time being in town in certain ways, but then I'm like, maybe come sit out here every morning for an hour, or when the sun's rising, and watch in the daily, every day. And what would you learn, by watching?
And I guess, that's a good point. And it brings to mind pilgrimage really as a subset of meditation, right? It's a form of meditation practice. And so when you take it to that level, we can meditate in infinite ways on infinite amounts of items. And this is one form, but there's lots of other ways to be able to accomplish that. And I do think that is a universal core kind of tool in the toolbox for personal happiness and well-being, is to have some form of meditation practice.
I do love the idea of the connection between the green path and the idea of pilgrimage, and the creative interpretation of what that can mean for any person anywhere. For me in my life right now, being kind of nomadic and being slightly influenced by that thought, and you know, how can I turn different aspects of what I'm doing into a pilgrimage? You know, how can I push that edge at any moment for myself? Like what if I decided to walk up the coast? And I wish that I could fill my entire life with that all the time, you know, like, and I guess in some ways my life is that, but like, I think about like, okay, in a year, you know, living more minimally, what if I took the time to slow down and like do this little walk, or then sit in this place for days and observe, you know, and how much there is to that. And that's just for me and my life and what I'm able to do, and have a lot of privilege to be able to do what I'm doing. But I just think there's so many possibilities for what that could be for someone, you know, to have pilgrimage in place, whether it's exactly where they are and within the confines of the situation that they live in, to try to be more connected to themselves and the environment, or it could be interpreted in other ways, like I'm just going to hitchhike across the country, or just start walking and see what happens.
Yeah, and I would say that going forward, and this is for anybody, especially like way in the future, that might happen to be listening to this, if we were so lucky, is that we really have to reframe our idea around our goals, around our bucket lists, around these places that people want to make pilgrimages to that are far afield. And I'm very torn by this. The name of our organization, Plants and Healers International, Frank Cook, our primary inspiration in starting that organization, traveled all over the world and had a goal to meet every single family of plant in the world, and most of the genera, if possible. And I kind of, 10, 12, 15 years ago, saw myself following in his footsteps. I come from a military family on one side. My dad traveled all over the world that way. I come from a Dutch family on the other side, and Dutch people are renowned for their travels, and my parents from Europe have been pretty much any place that anybody listening might ever want to go, and a number of them more times than once. And kind of just this idea of how that is based on something that is inherently moving forward, at least as the technology provides now, unsustainable, right? That it's built on all of this fossil carbon that was accumulated over hundreds of millions of years that we're running through in just a matter of centuries. And part of Frank's legacy with our nonprofit has been to lead trips, international trips, to places that he went to, like Peru and Costa Rica, and thinking about other places that he went as well. And we've really downscaled that in relationship to this idea of how much carbon that it takes to make a trip like that, and especially to make a trip like that for a very short span of time. And I'm very sensitive to this idea that is, potentially contra to my goal, which is that people hearing this, especially now versus in the future, could be like, well, like what a downer or whatever, like especially, I put an extreme sense out there, folks that are making a pilgrimage to go to Burning Man out in California from all over the country and other parts of the world now, that basically not only are, they burning this man in the middle of the desert and burning through tons of, resources in order to participate in that practice, but each one of those flights is like one of these fires that's really big in our press right now in the Amazon. There's tens of thousands of fires in the Amazon that are burning right now. And a lot of people are protesting that and saying, well, what a terrible thing that is in a situation. And it is, of course. And at the same time, people that might be posting up online about how terrible that is are going to jump on a plane and basically start their own mini version of one of those fires to fly somewhere. And so for me, it's not that I've come to a place where I'm absolutely putting a kibosh on plane travel for a number of reasons, but I'm really every single trip now deeply analyzing the need of it, how I can make the most of that privilege and opportunity, and how I can stay in the place that I'm going for as long as possible versus like just jetting in and jetting out for a couple few day type of experience. And I just beg and plead for anybody listening now to, just really do that calculus yourself, without, trying to put a blame shame game on people. I mean, obviously lots of reasons, lots of people feel like they need to travel, but just to think about it more consciously. And for the future, if, as I said, you're listening somewhere decades down the line, let alone centuries, should we be so lucky, that I have dedicated my life to making your future better and to blending the edge of the issues that we face around using all this carbon and the climate change that's coming from it.
I think about this stuff a lot, given that like at one point I just lived on a farm in this area and pretty much didn't leave most of the time. I felt like my impact was really minimal. We composted, had human manure, grew all our own food, barely had electricity, and like one barn that we all, like 10 people shared, and consolidated resources, lived outside a lot, like, and now I'm driving around in a diesel truck that doesn't run on grease. And I do feel like my life is about offering something and connecting, right now anyways, connecting this web of like maybe it's ecologies or people within those ecologies and the projects they're doing. And so, but weighing out a lot in my mind, and heart, I guess, around, I mean, we all burn fossil fuels at any moment, even when we try our hardest, to be conscious of that. It's like impossible not to in some way, like even, this recorder is made out of plastic, for example, but travel in that way is pretty huge, and there's ways that you can travel with less impact, for sure, but it's definitely something to think about, like how much is it worth to gain that perspective in that far away place, and to gain an understanding of that place by visiting it, and then is there a way, is it black and white, is there a way to do it that counters the fossil fuels used? And I think, I mean, you travel to Costa Rica a lot, you do work there, and you're offering something to that place when you're there that increases the people's connection to that place, but I still think, yeah, it's something to think about. In my generation anyways, is like, people really want to travel and see the world and not get the 9-to-5 job and like figure out how to just barely do that. And I wonder sometimes, like, is that the best way? Is staying put and just connecting to this specific place right here, right now, better? I mean, what's good and what's bad, with it all? And I think, yeah, it's just something to think about,
Yeah, gosh, I'm so grateful that you have been up for this conversation, Kelly, because, you're a person that we see periodically in our community, and then you're on pilgrimage to the next one, and you're leaving today. So I'm just really glad that we could encapsulate this in space and time. And I think what you came to somewhere in there was this idea of it not being black and white, and that there are no exact hard fast answers for most of this stuff, that everybody has to do their own individual inventory. And I love what you said about how when you're living at Dancing Spring, shout out to Barnardsville, that was a time in your life where you were kind of, if you would think about like banking sustainability, like you were uber sustainable at that point, And so kind of this idea of scale over time and averaging out things, because I actually envision the reverse, like 5 to 10 years from now, I envision myself not hardly traveling at all and being in Barnardsville on some farm and going for days or weeks without leaving that land, period. And at the same time, that's something that I know will bring me great joy. And that's something that would be like a horror movie for somebody from an urban environment, maybe, that like loves to connect and needs like a lot of stimulus. And so we all kind of have to make our choices and how we can do that offsetting. I would definitely mention that there are all these great online apps like to calculate your CO2 that you use. And it was such a wake-up call when I first did that like 15 years ago. I was a student at Warren Wilson, and I was kind of high on my horse, to be honest, with all the different things that I've made as choices from even back then, dietary choices, fuel efficiency choices in vehicles, using secondhand clothes, like all of these different kinds of things. I was like, oh, I'm going to be, in the 99th percentile. But when I put in my plane travel, it put me at like, we need 3 Earths if we had like a world like you, and so that was the start. But it really didn't come as strong until, really even last year we had the scientific report that said we need to cut carbon in half in like 10 to 12 years in order to really avoid, like definite catastrophe practically. And these are from fairly conservative scientists. And to me, that was my come to spirit moment of like, okay, well, you've done all of these choices along the way, and that's good. And at the same time, it's clear with going to these international places in particular that you're still way above the level that is sustainable for the average person. And even though every time I do travel, it's for work pretty much, and I work obsessively the whole time, I still want to think more and more about things like this PAN project we have. How can we be working virtually to connect people and places, and also with publications. Frank wrote quite a bit, and we're working on revising some of his publications from his travels, and then also coming up with new publications based off of our more recent travels. And so that's my personal process. Everybody has their own, and I think really just to encourage people not to feel guilty, but to just feel like empowered to make those choices on their own terms while we still have that choice, because I feel like coming forward into the future, 10, 15, 20 years from now, the choices are probably going to be a lot more limited and a lot more enforced upon us.
Yeah, a lot of things are coming up in my mind right now in this conversation, and I'm thinking about, I did a permaculture training this past spring at the Occidental Arts and Ecology Center in California. I'd never actually done a training, and I've worked on farms like Dancing Springs that had implemented permaculture pieces to the farm, and I was living within that world, but I haven't actually done like a design course. And one of the biggest things they reiterated in the course, and they were pretty social justice focused with that program there, and was the importance of cultural and ecological health being hand in hand. And so like the things that we do kind of have both of those embodied in them, the choices that we make. And I think this wraps back around to parts of what the green path really can be, like all the different sort of like tangential and like interdisciplinary kind of pieces of it all. I feel like in a way do that, like the idea of like, it's something you've said before too, the cultural topsoil thing. What are things that are cultural topsoil? Like topsoil and health, cultural health come together, so like choosing not to fly can be one thing, but also the idea of learning these skills as a form of activism that lowers our footprint on the earth, and connects us and makes us happier with each other and the world we live in, So I think it could be big choices like choosing not to fly as much, or it could be choices like making your own mead or growing something you're going to want to eat in your garden, just as much.
And like most things, it's an incremental process. I mean, nobody goes from 0 to 100 instantly, and so that's another thing that I'd like to encourage, is that whether it's making your own sauerkraut or honey wine or double dug bed for your garden or having a few chickens, just kind of like open up your mind to ways that really resonate with you, that fit your personal program, and at the same time know that it's not equivalent to have a water bottle and always refill that versus like flying 20 times a year, that like
huge.
Yeah. Just you gotta be honest with yourself, and if you feel like you need to fly 20 or even 40 or 50 times a year, then that is what it is, I guess, to some degree. But it's gonna be way more expensive for once carbon starts getting taxed like it should for things like that. And probably untenable long term. So even if it's not of your own accord, just know that society is shifting with a lot of these things. And then you bring in the social justice piece. You think about, once again, the Amazon burning. You think about all the people that couldn't even dream if they wanted to, of doing the things that a lot of folks in the U.S. and
The Western world.
richer places have the ability to do. And like, you know, for me, I've always been more, how can we self-regulate versus like have something that's a dictate from above, you know, some kind of governmental, bureaucratic type of situation or whatever, or even just a societal kind of like pointing fingers or whatever. It's like just encouraging people to just really look within and kind of figure out how they can do their part, you know, in this process, and to incrementally decrease carbon use and incrementally increase skills, basically, in whatever way they can.
Gosh, this travel piece just brings up so much, because I think about tourism and ecotourism and the pros and cons. I mean, I know in some instances, like a place is preserved because people from the Western world want to come there and learn about the plants, right? And that's how it's economically able to exist.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's going to get cut down and palm is going to get put down or something. So it's
Right.
just like mind-boggling.
Right.
Yet us coming there to learn, this is just one example, you know, the idea of going to a place to learn at this preserve that's preserved because people want to come there in itself is counter, you know.
The people coming there are decreasing the preservation potential for the place that they're coming to celebrate and preserve.
And there's a power dynamic there too that is often not spoken about, or people going to do ayahuasca. There's like a whole other conversation right there.
You said the A word. Yeah, maybe we could have a whole podcast on shamanism, because that's way too loaded, and I think we're coming in for a landing. But I think definitely, though, like you said, it's just really important for people to, I think, evaluate the net effect, not just like the face effect of their actions, you know, because something that can look sustainable on the face of it could be very inherently unsustainable beneath. You know, you go to a great conference on sustainability that has super unsustainable food or something like that, you know, and you have those types of disjuncts, you know, or super wasteful with lots of materials that just get thrown away afterwards and things. And like anything, it's a spectrum, and these things are messy. You know, there's not really a lot of hard, fast, yes, no, black, white answers to this across the board, for especially anything beyond the individual level. And that's why it's all the more important for us to be proactive in figuring out our part to play, and how we can do that of our own accord.
Mm-hmm. Well, is there anything else you want to share about the Green Path, and something we might have missed in our conversations about all of this?
Gosh, well, I mean, I just guess I would follow, because some information that can be helpful that hasn't been mentioned is just how to have more contact. So we mentioned Plants and Healers International is a nonprofit I work for,
Mm-hmm.
and they of course have a website. It's plantsandhealers.org.
Mm-hmm.
But then there is also this other website that's a sister website that is also continuing Frank Cook's work in a certain form, which is the website botанyeveryday.com.
Right.
And at that website, I continue Frank's online class that he taught by donation using the book Botany in a Day by Thomas Eppel. And at the same time, there is also some other aspects to the Botany Everyday site around other things I do outside of the aegis of the nonprofit, and both locally in this bioregion and in some other places as well. And there's lots of really great resources. I just mentioned a little bit, like the Pan Project, but we have lots of recipes and videos and reading lists and plant lists and all sorts of other things on both those websites where people could follow up. And I just really encourage every one of you to do your part as you can, and pray for the planet and pray for the people on it and all the other organisms too.
Yes, definitely. And thanks, Mark, for sharing all of this. And yeah, I'm glad we got to connect in this little moment. I'm coming into town with a whirlwind and leaving, and yeah, hopefully we get to sit down again sometime and talk more.
I really hope so, because it's just always such a joy to be with you, and it always brings up really interesting ideas.
Thanks.
All right, till next time.
Bye.
You just listened to a conversation with Marc Williams on the Ground Shots podcast. The interstitial music for this episode was by Mother Marrow, and the song is entitled Come Home. If you have any suggestions for music for the podcast, please feel free to email me at kelly@upsedgeandsalt.com, and it's linked in the show notes. I would love to feature new and interesting and dynamic music, and I'm pretty open to all kinds of music, so send some suggestions my way. I hope you enjoyed this episode with Marc, and thanks for listening, y'all. This episode of the Ground Shots podcast was produced by Opia Creative. Our music is by Mother Marrow. If you'd like to help us continue to make this audio project a reality, consider becoming a monthly supporter on our Patreon page at patreon.com/ofsedgeandsalt, where we have rewards like entry into patron-only giveaways, additional audio interviews, extra educational content, and much more. You can also share our work and give us a review on iTunes. Visit our website at ofsedgeandsalt.com to see what else we're up to and a log of our episodes when they come out. Check out our show notes for information about how to find us and our guests. Until next time, y'all, thanks for listening.